Imagine you are 5 years old. Your mother is gone. Your father is gone. You have nothing. No home, no food, no name that anyone uses anymore. What happens to you? In the modern world, you know the answer. Foster care, adoption agencies, government programs, a system built specifically to catch you before you fall. But for 99.9% of human history, none of that existed. There were no orphanages, no social workers, no legal guardians appointed by a court. There was only the world, and the world was brutal. So what actually happened to orphaned children in the ancient world? The answer will change the way you think about human nature. Let's start at the very beginning. We're talking 300,000 years ago. Your ancestors lived in small mobile bands of roughly 20 to 50 people. Hunters, gatherers, survivors. Every single person in that group had a role, a function, a contribution, and a child who had just lost both parents was, from a survival standpoint, a liability. This is where most people assume the worst. They imagine ancient humans abandoning orphaned children, leaving them behind. Because that is what a cold, ruthless calculation would demand. But that assumption is wrong. The anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy spent decades studying this question. Her landmark work, Mothers and Others, published in 2009, turned the standard picture of early human parenting on its head. Hrdy found that humans evolved as what she calls cooperative breeders. Unlike most primates, where the mother does almost all of the childcare, human children were raised by an entire network of caregivers, grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, unrelated group members. Everyone played a part. Hrdy coined the term Alloparents to describe these non-parent caregivers, and her research showed that in most hunter-gatherer societies studied today and historically, alloparenting is not the exception. It is the norm, which means the orphaned child was not a stranger to the group. They were already being partially raised by multiple adults. The loss of the biological parents was devastating, but the support network was already there. Think about what that means for your ancestors. The 5-year-old who lost their mother did not suddenly become invisible. They became the shared responsibility of an entire community, not because of a law, not because of a government mandate, but because the group's survival depended on its children surviving. Kim Sterelny, a philosopher of biology at Australian National University, has argued that this kind of cultural inheritance, the passing of knowledge and belonging from generation to generation, was so essential to human evolution that groups simply could not afford to lose their children. An orphaned child carried future labor, future knowledge, future genetic contribution to the group. Abandoning them was abandoning an investment. But survival calculations are only part of the story. There is something else, something that researchers have found again and again when studying both ancient burial sites and modern hunter-gatherer communities. Something that points to a far older and deeper human truth. Grief. In 2014, archaeologist Maria Martinon Torres and her colleagues published findings from the Sima de los Huesos site in northern Spain. This was a pit containing the remains of at least 28 individuals, dating back roughly 430,000 years. Among the dead were children, and the deliberate placement of bodies deep underground, in a location that required significant effort to reach, told researchers something extraordinary. These were not people simply discarded. They were placed, honored, mourned. We cannot know for certain that the children found there were orphans, but the evidence of ritual burial, of deliberate care for the dead, suggests that even before modern humans walked the earth, something like grief, something like communal mourning, was already shaping how our ancestors treated those they lost. Orphaned children were not invisible. They were mourned. And then they were absorbed. Now jump forward. Move out of the deep prehistoric past and into the ancient civilizations. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome. Here the picture becomes more complex, more documented, and, in some cases, far darker. In ancient Mesopotamia, roughly 4,000 years ago, the earliest written legal codes began to address the orphan directly. The Code of Ur-Nammu, dating to around 2100 BCE, explicitly protected widows and orphans from exploitation by the powerful. This is one of the earliest written acknowledgments in human history that orphaned children were vulnerable. that the law needed to step in because natural community care was not always enough. But written law and lived reality are different things. In ancient Rome, the situation was starkly two-tiered. Wealthy orphans, especially male heirs, could be placed under a legal guardian, a tutor, who managed their inheritance until they came of age. The Roman legal system had elaborate structures for this. The orphaned child of a senator lived in a very different world from the orphaned child of a slave. The orphaned child of a slave had no legal status at all. They were property, and they could be sold. Historian Judith Evans Grubbs, in her research on Roman family law, documented how the fate of orphans in Rome was almost entirely determined by social class. Elite orphans were fought over. Their guardianship was a source of wealth and power. Poor orphans were absorbed into households as cheap labor, apprenticed to tradesmen, or left to fend for themselves on the streets of cities like Rome or Alexandria. In ancient Athens, the state actually took a formal role in protecting the property of citizen orphans. The Archon, a senior magistrate, was legally responsible for overseeing orphaned children of Athenian citizens. But again, this protection applied only to citizens. The children of non-citizens, slaves, or foreigners had no such protection. The pattern repeats across civilizations. When a society creates formal structures for orphan care, those structures almost always serve the children of the powerful first. But something else was also happening. Something harder to quantify. Something rooted in the older, deeper cooperative biology that Hrdy described. Across cultures, across millennia, neighbors took in orphaned children. Extended family stepped forward. Religious institutions, as they emerged, created early forms of communal care. In ancient Israel, care for the orphan and the widow was not merely encouraged, it was commanded. The Hebrew Bible returns to this obligation again and again. To neglect the orphan was a moral failure, a sign of a society that had lost its covenant with its own values. In early Buddhist communities in ancient India, monasteries became places where orphan children, especially boys, could find shelter, education, and community. The monastery was not a government program. It was a human network responding to a human need. Now here is the counterintuitive twist. For most of human history, the orphan was not primarily a problem for the state to solve. The orphan was a problem for the community to solve. And in small, tightly knit communities where everyone knew every child's name, that problem was usually solved. Imperfectly, with grief, but solved. The industrial era changed everything. When urbanization began pulling families apart, when traditional village networks fractured, when you could live in a city of 1 million people and not know your neighbor's name, the old cooperative system broke down. The result was the Victorian Orphanage, the institution, the warehouse for unwanted children, not because humans had become crueler, but because the human network that had always cared for orphan children had been destroyed. Eric Olin Wright, the sociologist, described this as the displacement of social bonds by market and state structures. The community didn't disappear. It was reorganized, and in the reorganization, the most vulnerable fell through. So what does this tell you? It tells you that your instinct to protect a vulnerable child is not modern. It is not civilized. It is not something your culture taught you. It is 300,000 years old. It is written into your biology by millions of years of cooperative survival. Every time you feel the pull to help a child in need, every time something in you reacts to seeing a child alone and frightened, you are not being sentimental. You are being human in the oldest and most essential way. The orphan child was never truly alone, until we made the world large enough that alone became possible. And the question that ancient humans never had to ask, because the answer was always obvious, is the question your civilization still has not fully answered. Who is responsible for the child that nobody claims? Your ancestors knew. The whole group was.